All right, thank you everybody for making time in your busy schedules to come today. We're talking about our teaching circle that we put together. It focuses on research and writing, and rather than doing formal introductions, I figured we could each introduce ourselves as we talk about each part of the writing circle. So Nicole, if you want to start.
Sure. All right, my name is Nicole Goulet. I'm from the Department of Religious Studies, I should say. I'm going to start by talking about some of the data concerning our research that we've accomplished over the last year or two, I guess. Basically what had happened is that we never actually kept track of how much we had accomplished, and so what I did at one point is just started compiling everything that we did. So from fall 2015 to fall 2016, these are some of the things that we did in terms of article submissions, chapters for edited volumes, book proposals, presentations. I think we could probably even add to that by the time we made the slide last. Basically, I thought it was important that we kind of look at this because we always had this sense that we weren't doing enough, and when in fact we are actually doing quite a lot. Part of this had to do with some of the struggles that we felt in the process of doing our research. Also, too, the idea that the processes for these various things that we were working towards, like chapters and article submissions, really take quite a bit of time. And so we felt like we were plugging along, but not getting anywhere. And also, too, I guess it was a way for us, as we went through these struggles, to commiserate with one another and share in the process. When we kind of shared in our research, we were able to kind of share with each other kind of insider information that maybe we didn't get otherwise, which included how to submit a book proposal or what to do for chapters, that kind of thing. I think that covers it for now.
Hi, I'm Christine Baker. I'm in the history department here, and I want to talk a little bit about how did we decide who to have in our group? How did we just decide how big it was going to be, who should be in it, and that kind of thing? We think that one of the most important parts is you can't have a giant group. For us, 5 made sense. It wasn't too big or too small. I feel like anything more than 6 is going to start getting unmanageable in terms of finding a meeting time. We have had some struggles finding a time when all of us are available. And we really had to plan for that. Like, we talk to each other before we decide on our office hours and stuff like that, because we want to make sure that we really prioritize like the half an hour or 45 minutes or so once a week when we meet. One thing that you need to consider is, do you want to form a group that's just within your department? Do you want sort of like all people that work on the same thing? Do you want it within the same college? Do you want it to be completely and totally interdisciplinary? For us, we are all in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, and so that made sense to us that none of us work on the exact same thing. Erin and I are both in the history department, but we work on very different topics. She does modern America, I do the medieval Middle East. And so it's really a fresh set of eyes, but people who have an understanding of sort of the methods and approach that we would want to take, but also who can give different kinds of advice from their own field, and that's been really, really useful. Like, I've sent out, because I do some things that are related to religious history, I've sent out my chapter or an article to these ladies, and like Nicole has had some really great things to say about it from the perspective of religious studies, and that's been really helpful. The question of whether or not you want junior faculty, senior faculty, some kind of mix, that's also important. For us, we were kind of going with, we wanted people who were a little bit more junior, partially because we wanted to be able to open up when we were meeting. We didn't want to we wanted to be able to talk really honestly about the things that were going well and the things that weren't, and sort of be a support group as well as being a place to help us be more productive. And so we decided that just for us that it would be all people who were not yet tenured. There are other considerations that you can make. Gender is certainly one of them. We also decided kind of early on that we liked that the group was all women. We didn't specifically make that decision. This group actually came together, at least in part, because we were friends. And that I think is also important, because we look forward to our meetings, because if we haven't had a chance to see each other all week, we get together and talk about hey, I accomplished this or that or this, and we are really looking forward to that. But when we thought back on it, we also did like that it was all women. We thought that that was helpful for us. So that is just something that you can think about. But I would say that the fact that we're friends is really important, because it does mean that we make room for it in our schedule. We look forward to it. We make sure to stay on topic during the meetings. We will sometimes catch up and chat and such, but we do the work first. And actually, we stay on topic a lot more than we expected. We expected to maybe get a little off topic a little more than we do. We're good kids. But those were some of the considerations that we thought about when we were making our group, and I think some of the important questions that you need to think about when making another group. And I think.
So I'm Erin Conlin, as mentioned, from the history department, and some of the stuff overlaps a little bit with what Christine was just talking about. And so as we were putting this together, part of the project was also thinking about how do we keep track of stuff. And it's the level of accountability that came into it. So for every meeting that we have, I pull out my laptop and I'm constantly taking notes. I just took a little screenshot to kind of show a sample of what it would be. And so, it always has the date, it gives what the update the person had for that week, what they were accomplishing, and then it's also what your goals are for the next time. And I think it's equally important to recognize that this is a process that has both successes and failures to it. As I was putting this together, literally my success for the week that I was writing down is that I opened a book. I mean, literally, I just opened it. And then I managed to go to the coffee shop, and Lori was there, and I read a couple more pages, right? And I started on it, but it was something so small that I had been like, oh, I'll do this later, and finally I was like, oh, later is now today, because the group is going to meet, and I need to say I opened the book. So for mine, sometimes you'll see, and Lori will get to this in a minute, sometimes things are in bold, sometimes they're regular, but each of these, there's a way for us to keep track of that in our meeting. In terms of the meetings, as Christine had mentioned, that we make a point to meet, we actually decided to make a conscious decision to do that on campus. Partly because that way it still felt like a work activity where it was still a priority. It's at the, whatever time we chose to do that. But we also did want to make sure that we were not necessarily in a space that was in our offices where somebody's going to be coming and going or asking questions. We found an alternative space to sit to do that. And that was really helpful. So that way we weren't really disrupted during this time on most occasions. Relating to that, we had the consistency, same time, same place, and whenever possible. If people can't make it, one of the things that we usually try to do then is provide an opportunity via email to send in that update. So that way they, again, still have that accountability even if you're gone.
Can I add something? I think one of the things that also really helped about having it on campus in a particular space is this is a real meeting that is actually a priority in our lives. And it's so easy to have other things that happen, that come up, and it's, to be able to say no, I have a real thing at that time. I cannot go do this other thing. I am not available. Because research a lot of times gets sort of pushed to the side when other things pop up. And having it be this thing where it's well, no, we have a room and we have a date time. It's a thing. I cannot do another thing at this time.
That's very true. I put it on my work calendar,
exactly.
So it's very clearly listed that way. And that was really intentional. And again, going as well to, as Christine mentioned, the idea that we are friends. I was definitely one person where I was I need to look forward to this, because by the end of the day, I am exhausted, and it's then something where I'm oh, it's a meeting, but it's the meeting I actually want to go to, as opposed to the many that I just had that I didn't want to do, right? And so I was okay, I'm ready to go. And then as we had mentioned, it's really about doing the business part of it first. We are friends, and so conversations will come up, but we actually are pretty good at catching ourselves and being nope, I will save that story, or I will ask about that later, but I'm first going to go through. And basically, we just always go around the table. If somebody has something they want to share, we start, but otherwise we just work our way right around and just kind of get updates. If somebody thinks of something or has, feedback that they want to give, we build that into it as well. But otherwise, it's really all about talking about what did I plan to do from last week? how successful was I or not, and to recognize that it's okay if you're not, right? But then, okay, well, what's the goal for the next time? And sometimes those goals might carry over, but seeing that week to week you're talking about it at least puts you in a good frame of mind to think about, well, maybe I need to bite off a smaller portion of this project to begin with. Maybe it is just opening the book or getting it from the library before they send it back from ILL. Whatever it happens to be, but to at least get that process underway. And so the next part of it will be Rachel, who's going to talk a little bit about getting into the details.
So, hello, I'm Rachel Sternfeld. I'm in the Political Science department. So I want to talk a bit about the particular focus of this was getting us to write. So we have our weekly meetings where we report in and talk about what we've accomplished, what we haven't accomplished, and what we want to accomplish. But we've also used the group meeting to talk about a written something that someone has produced. And so we give each other feedback as well. And that's been, I think this is where the interdisciplinarity piece of it comes in. We're not saying, oh, but you didn't cite this author or that author, or what about this kind of nuancy detail? Yeah. There's been a lot of discussion of the through line, of making kind of the arc of the argument. And I think because we do come from the humanities and social sciences, the way that we understand that is similar, but we're also not terribly distracted by the details.
If I can add to that, I know, so one of the things I've often found is my writing in my head makes perfect sense, and I'm like, yeah, that flows together. And then other people look at it and they're like, no. That didn't get you from point A to point B. And I know in particular, Nicole and I have gone around on a couple of things where she'll be like, here's an abstract, why is this down in paragraph 3 when it really should be your leading part? And I think Nicole is really good at the editing portion of it. And as soon as I see it, I'm like, oh, obviously, right? Like, it should have been there. And I think that speaks to we have different skill sets that we bring in, and by reading those writings, we have a chance to actually talk about that. And sort of on the related note, right, the idea that this is a teaching circle. And I know it hadn't really crossed my mind until looking at the handouts that Teresa had given us, thinking about how you translate your research into a teaching aspect. And for mine, it was remembering how hard writing is, right? That we take for granted many things that our students are struggling with, and yet going through this process, when I look at a student's paper and I think that is organizationally a disaster, I realize Nicole might have that same reaction, and that's okay, because we are all continuing to try to be better writers. And so it was very much building empathy, that in your head when you're writing something, you have that moment where you're like, this is awesome, and then you read it later and you're like, or not exactly, it's okay.
Yeah. And I talk to my students about that. I say, when I comment on their papers, I will say, when I comment on papers from my colleagues, when I read my own writing, I make comments like this too. Like we can all improve, and we all need to focus on our argumentation and make sure we're clear and we're using strong language. And so being able to talk a little bit about this process and how we share work, I hope helps them.
With the idea of multiple drafts.
Yeah,
The ones that we send out, that it's constantly this evolving process, that it's not the first one.
It's just like, well, I got to the 3rd page, I'm done.
So in an effort to help us with our drafting process and with our writing process, kind of starting over the summer, Lori and I worked on this, but we have our weekly meeting where we report, and that's all that we do, or and maybe give some feedback on something written. But that's simply, right, the purpose of that is not to create work, but to keep each other on task. So then, starting in the summer and really kind of moving into actual happening, this fall we've been holding additional meetings where we write, where the purpose is, and this is when we get together at the coffee shop. And this semester we've been doing it 2 mornings a week for an hour or 2. Later in the semester, things got busy, so they've been happening slightly less frequently. But for the first month or 2 there, we did pretty well. Most of us showing up at least once a week to these meetings. And we would sit and write for 2 hours, and occasionally someone would get up and get a coffee, and we'd say, oh my gosh, this happened last night. But we used that time to write, and it was nice because it was hard there was peer pressure not to do. Right, it was in the mornings, classes are coming up, right? If I was at home, I would be doing prep for classes, but because I was there with these ladies, I was more likely, not 100%, but much more likely to work on the project that I have going.
Yeah.
So
can I actually one more thing too?
Well, I was just gonna add that one of the things about tracking everything and irregular writing is that we also noticed how we have different rhythms.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Right? Yeah, because I'd always be like, I'm not doing anything, and you're like, well, if we look at the notes, I didn't do anything last fall at this time either.
Oh, right.
And so then when we can't make meetings regularly, and then all of a sudden we can, right? And so these tracking everything and meeting regularly, it's good, even if it's not all the time.
Yeah.
Sorry, is that
No, and that's, I just wanted to make sure you included that, because I remembered having this conversation about like, I feel like I'm not doing anything, and it's like, oh, it's because it's the start of a school year, and you know, there's so many other variables there, and then it is settling into that routine, at least for some of us, it tends to break out that way.
Definitely.
Okay, Lori.
All right. Ooh. All right. So I'm Lori Labotka. I'm in the Department of Anthropology. And I have the fun stuff that we do on my side, which is very important. So we've already mentioned a couple times that we really try and keep those weekly reporting meetings on track. We try and make sure that we get our business done first, and then maybe sort of the more friend hangout time later. So one of the ways that we make sure that these meetings stay on track is that we have sort of built-in ways that we recognize successes and that we celebrate the kinds of achievements that people are making. Whether those achievements are large or small. As Erin mentioned, I was there when she finally opened her book, and I glanced over and I saw the book open, and I was like, Erin, you opened it, you know? Because sometimes, some weeks or some months, we just have so much going on that really that's all we can do, and that is still a positive step. We're still working on our research in the ways that we can. We also encourage each other both at the weekly meetings and over emails and text throughout the week if we know somebody has something going on. Or for those writing group meetings in the mornings, we'll start texting each other maybe like a half hour before we're gonna meet and say, hey, are you going? I'm going, and that sometimes helps encourage you to actually go. You might be not feeling like leaving the house in the morning, but then you see the text and you're like, okay, well, they're going. So I'll go too, and then you end up getting that writing done that you might not have gotten done otherwise. And then in terms of the ways that we actually have sort of built in to celebrate bigger kinds of accomplishments, like finishing an article or submitting an article or getting an article accepted or even a conference paper, any kind of book proposals, all those big things. If we're not together, like over the summer, we would email each other congratulations and make sure we recognize those accomplishments. But during our weekly meetings, as Erin mentioned, some things are in bold, and those are those really big accomplishments. And
exclamation points.
And exclamation points, yes. And you might not, think that would be so exciting, but it's really exciting when you're in the meeting and somebody says that you get bold. It's very exciting. It really is, because it's important. It's important to recognize that we are meeting these goals and we are achieving these things and to support each other through that. Of course, we cheer. You probably noticed we're a pretty animated group. So there's also cheering at our meetings and at the coffee shop when somebody opens a book. And then for those really big accomplishments, we will set aside time to go to a happy hour or time to actually have a more social celebration outside of our regular meeting. So we'll often go out for Prosecco when an article gets published or something that's really big because we do want to make sure to keep that social aspect as well and have fun. In addition to getting things done. I think that's all I have.
All right.
Okay.
No. Any questions?